afternoon, everybody. I know you're all looking forward to the drink reception in like 45 minutes, but first we have this amazing session. And so I'm going to introduce Duncan Fidlater. Duncan is the head of our client services division with our EMS team. He's spent the last 18 months working in the Hobsons APAC office based in Melbourne, Australia, as a client services manager, assisting Hobsons partner universities with their marketing and recruitment activities for both international and domestic students. And also we have Stuart Rennie. Stuart is an experienced international director with over 12 years experience. He has delivered students from West Africa, the Gulf States, Europe, and Southern Asia, and now he owns his own consulting business.
Thanks very much. So just briefly before I kick off, especially as a couple of people have to leave halfway through, we've got this classroom set up, so it is designed to be kind of interactive. I don't want to stand up here and just kind of talk at you for my session. So I'm going to do about 20 minutes, but do stop and ask questions throughout. Then I'll hand over to Stuart. Stuart, who we've been working together for about 4 years now, mainly during his role at Robert Gordon University, where we worked on a lot of strategies together, certainly around the kind of internationalisation focus. So he's very adept at kind of getting the buy-in from all the different people that you need to, understands what it means to outsource something like this to a company like Hobsons. So I'll kind of set the scene at the beginning, and then Stuart will go into a bit of detail about actual real-life scenarios. So firstly, I should state, thanks, there's no clicker, so I'm going to be using Stuart as my assistant. So next slide, thanks very much. I should start with just why are we here, because obviously this isn't a Hobsons EMT conference, and you guys all use those products or know about those products. I'm from the other side of the business, which is the inquiry management services, so very much the international focus side. So I don't really, because of the time situation, have a lot of time to go into what the difference is, but as it's very much a fully outsourced people service. So whilst we rely on a CRM, we also have a team of 20 student support officers in the office who handle all calls and email and web form inquiries for universities. So that's kind of the key difference. So why are we here? This is a question I get asked a lot at most of the conferences I go to. And essentially, in order to understand the benefits of the service, I just want to talk to you very briefly, 2 minutes, about how Hobsons EMS came about. It was through a conversation in 1999 over in Australia between our managing director and 5 universities. They were looking at the internationalisation of their universities, looking at the process, saying, we don't have the infrastructure to do this. We don't know, we don't have the expertise to do this, because we were working in publishing over there at that point. And through that came this contact centre, very much focused on phone at that point, and it developed into email. We came over to the UK in 2005, 2006, and started working with 4 universities in our first year. We're now up to 15 partner institutions. As you can see, there's a broad range. The service, whilst we're working with universities, fundamentally have the same aims and goals. They also have very different kind of strands within them. For example, the University of Southampton is very different to, say, Richmond University. So the service is fully flexible in that respect. So that's it on Hobsons. More than happy to talk to you more about that afterwards. This bit is kind of going to touch on what we talked about this morning in the plenary sessions. So just before, I just wanted a couple of notes that I made. Certainly Ben Page talking about more and better communications will help, engagement being a two-way process, consumer, customer, consumer, customer. These are all the things that came up this morning and kind of recurring themes at the moment. Smart universities will be creating longer-term relationships. So where we are at the moment, if you go on to the next slide, everything's shifting. Hobsons, when we first kind of came into existence, CMS was very much on customer service. That's what universities wanted us to do, to focus on customer service responsiveness. Speaking to our SLAs, we will respond to all student inquiries within 24 hours. That shifted, and that shifted for 3 reasons. The international office focus has shifted, the students we're dealing with shifted, and the market we're working has shifted. So if you go on to the next slide. Firstly, the international office. Stuart will be able to talk about this in much more detail, but if you just skip through, this is the situation in international operations in 2002. Now I realise a lot of you will have kind of domestic focuses, but the reason this is so pertinent is because, as I'm sure you're all aware, domestic and international are even more closely aligned than ever before. Everything that we talked about 10, 15 years ago in international, and now the conversations that are starting to happen in domestic, people are realising that there needs to be a smarter way of doing domestic recruitment and looking after domestic student success. So that was 2002, this is where we are in 2012. To sum up those slides, return on investment, that's the biggest thing. Whereas before it was, as I said on the previous slide, an ad hoc kind of academics would pick it up, go out on a visit, send back some student details, and somebody would follow them up as and when they had time. Now that isn't the case. Now it is a huge part of university business and is responsible for millions and millions of pounds worth of budget. So that's the international office, that's changed. The student expectations, consumer. Now this is something that I've had a number of conversations with a number of people about. My personal opinion is that the consumer-customer debate isn't actually that important. What's important is understanding why we're even having that debate. So if you go on to the next slide, Stuart, it's really about what the students are expecting. So whether they're consumers or not, it's about understanding what their needs are. And their needs certainly have changed. They're used to a responsiveness when they're speaking to anybody in completely different industries. They're used to getting the answers that they want to very difficult situations very quickly. So you've got that side of things as well. And then finally, you've got the world we operate in. There has never been more information available to these students, and they can go and source so much on their own. They don't necessarily need the university telling them everything, but at the same time, sorry, next slide, Stuart. Sorry. With all this information, there needs to be a filtering process. I think it was Wes Streeting this morning who said having all this information is great, but you need to be able to filter it and do something with it. And that's obviously another part of the process that we've had to really adapt as Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, Orkut, QQ, all these different Uniguru, all these different ways of students finding out information have kind of exploded. We've also seen that there's been this need for kind of constant source of truth that the student can come back to, and they know from the university that they'll be getting the actual facts. So you've got that, you've got the international student, you've got the international office, and you've got the market that we're working in. Going on with all of this is what's going on with the UK. Now, I'm sure that you've seen these quotes, again, focusing on international students, but there's a lot of confusion in the domestic market as well, which is fairly similar to what's going on here. So this is Theresa May. Now, this is, so if you just press that thing, this is, I don't want to be kind of over dramatic, but perception in the market, certainly when I was over in Australia, was that the UK was essentially closing itself for business. Not through anything that universities were doing, but just from what was being picked up by media, and we weren't managing the message very well. So we were having our message managed by the Daily Mail, the Guardian, you know, all these different types of newspapers were telling people what was going on here and reporting sound bites like that. You contrast that with Australia, and it couldn't be more different. Everything that an international student wanted, Australia did, essentially. And as I was talking to somebody at lunchtime, there are so many caveats around this, but Australia, obviously, they didn't report on them, they just reported on the headlines. So in the market, everybody now knows that Australia is well and truly open for business. Okay, so that's it on the market stuff. I just wanted to really recap so that we're all on the same page about what we're working in and why I wanted to focus on that. So if you go on to the next slide, that's where we are. So how do we raise the bar through outsourcing? It's based on CRM, so technology and people. These underline everything that we do. The CRM that we use in our CRM that we use for obviously is custom built, and its only focus is on student success. So it's built around the actual student and their communications. But that's one part of it. The real critical part is the SSO, so the people that we have in the office. We have people dedicated, and their only focus, and this is a question I asked at lunchtime of a couple of people, their only focus is on getting that student inquiry answered with the purpose of getting them to apply. Then, from application, once they've got their offer, to enrol. That's just what they do. So, I mean, I'm sure if you go into any of your offices at the moment and ask one of your team what their focus is for that day, that will change whether it's a Monday, a Wednesday, it's September, it's February. They're very different. Hobsons or outsourcing is very much focused on the same thing throughout the year. So they're the key things. Underpinning all of that is the data. So this is where we use all the information that we collect from students throughout the year to plan our communication strategies. So whilst I completely agree with more and better communication helping, as Ben said this morning, I think I'd caveat that with specific targeted information. Simply having more communication isn't going to quite cut it. So this slide, pipeline is the number of months from initial inquiry to enrolment, and this is averaged out across all our students, across all the partners that we work with. So we use this information, for example, if you look at the difference between India and Nigeria, to understand how long it's actually going to take for our marketing plans to see fruition. For example, if a university was to come to us in March and say, I know it sounds a little bit unbelievable, we've got some spare money, we want to know what we should be doing with it, where we should be marketing, we want to see results in September, chances are we'd say, well, let's have a look at what we can do in India, as opposed to what we can do in Nigeria, because we know it will take another couple of terms to get them in from Nigeria. Now, of course, there's kind of caveats around that, but that's just the average. So this helps kind of plan marketing strategies in terms of length of time and track return on investment. This one, I realise is quite complex, and so I'll take a bit of time to explain it. What this shows is students that came through to us, so first inquired in September 07, how many of them actually enrolled in September 07, and then how many enrolled in subsequent intakes. Does that make sense? And so for September 08, 09. So the real key message to take away from this, if you look at September 11 enrolments, this is an averaged out chart, in September 11, over 50% of those students that enrolled had actually inquired up to 4 years previously. So we're monitoring the pipeline, and then we're also monitoring the outliers, and so understanding that what you do in 1 year will have a certain effect. It's actually how you're managing those prospects for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Yeah? Delving even deeper than that, you've got your high level numbers, but then it's really about looking at what those high level numbers mean, going into the detail. So we've been tracking since 2007 prospects for all courses that come through to us, and seeing where the demand is, because obviously a lot of our universities want to know about what courses they should be offering. So we help them on that side of things. We're kind of surveying their students, showing them where demand is, showing them that where students are asking for courses that they don't offer, things like that. As you can see, I mean, business management, engineering, technology stayed right up there. But the interesting thing, especially with where we find ourselves economically at the moment, is that economics has slipped right off. So you know, that's not saying there's no demand for it, but it's actually slipped out of the top 10. So we track this side of things as well to feed back to universities for their plans. Diversification, massive thing for the universities we work with. And it's just coming from my Australian background, and obviously the situation that arose there with the Indian students, we had to kind of manage that and manage their strategy to ensure that they're not over-reliant, and it's something that we work with our universities here. We help them understand their cohort in terms of where they're potentially over-reliant on certain markets for certain courses. So if we see that their business and management or their oil and gas engineering courses are 60, 70, 80% Nigerians, we'll help them with strategies to try and diversify that so that they are kind of mitigating that risk somewhat. This chart shows how students are getting to the university, how they're inquiring, and the reason this is important is because it all comes down to kind of conversion. So we know, for example, so I hope you can see that at the back, this is prospects, so over your total prospect pool, how many came in via email, phone, web form or list? So list, just to explain, is where we get information from fairs or exhibitions that the university's been to, or if they've brought a list from Facebook advertising, these kind of things, and sent it through to us for follow-up. So we track that, and we also try and help them. So that was, sorry, I haven't labelled that very well, in 2006 and then in 2011, where we try and push them towards. Because we understand that conversion rates differ depending on where those students come from. So we know that a list generally converts at a much lower rate than those that come through via a web form. So again, it's understanding that if you're looking at your total prospects and you're up by 10%, but actually that 10% is almost all by lists, that's actually not going to have that big an impact on your enrolments that semester. So it's very much looking at how we can help universities kind of make sure that they're getting students from the right place, which is definitely web form, phone and email.
So was that conversions then?
That was just prospects, so that was prospect pool. Qualification, everything that we do is based on our ability to qualify students. So obviously our service is based on targeted specific communication. So this is the information that we try and get immediately or as soon as we possibly can. So if you go on to the next slide. Basically what this means, more qualification equals increased communication. So I hope that one's fairly straightforward. If we've got the 7 qualification levels, this is all within 1 week, by the way, because obviously we try and get this throughout the semester. This is within 1 week of the information being there. If we get 7 qualifiers, we will communicate with that student on average 2 times, an extra 2 times, and if we only got 3 pieces of information at the beginning. That is because we can target communication better, we can engage them quicker, and a more engaged student, more communication equals increased conversion. So this is actually amalgamated data showing that if we are able to communicate with students, and this, by the way, we do have limits around just outbound communication, so this isn't just a case of we're pushing lots of information on there. If they're not engaging back, then there'll be a certain strategy. So this is very much a two-way process, this slide. As you can see, if it's 12 plus, you're looking at a far increased conversion rate. So sum all that up, more information equals increased conversion. This is going back to all the talk this morning about what we need to be focusing on. We know that in terms of prospect numbers declining, it being harder for students to actually get into the country, we know that when we get these students, we need to really be focusing on the message that's getting through to them. And finally, last couple of slides, because this is a big one that's close to a lot of our international partners' hearts. They spend a lot of money on going out to fairs and exhibitions, meeting with students, and then sending them back to us to convert and get them to enrol. Typically, they have very low conversion rates compared to our web form, phone and email. But, and this next chart, if you go on to do it, here, this is a different chart, and it looks very similar. But we know again that if actually you go out there and you have set in your mind you're going to get this 7 key piece of information, if you look at the conversion rate, it increases from less than around about the 0% mark to 2.5% over. So again, it's about getting the information, but it's about getting the right information so that you can tailor your communication, so then we can put it into the strategy that we know works for either that country, that nationality, that course, or that faculty, school area of study. So hopefully that all makes sense. I realise I have to be very quick, and there's a lot of information in there. I'm more than happy to talk to people afterwards. The reason that we're doing all of this, obviously, is so that we can turn the international tap on, is actually what we're asked to do quite a lot of the time. We can't do that. Nobody can do that. But I think it's going to be a question that's asked of us increasingly because, as I said at the beginning, international and domestic are closer aligned than they ever have been before. And with the confusion in domestic, that is going to impact what happens in international. And as kind of numbers, we're starting to see numbers kind of in summertime, I think we'll be asked lots of questions about how we can turn the tap on. At which point, I will pass over to Stuart, who can actually go into a lot more detail about kind of real life situations.
Thanks very much, Duncan. The value of outsourcing. Before I kind of move on from what Duncan has been speaking about, is there anybody in the room who currently outsources any of the recruitment functions, or has been involved in it, or is considering it, just so I can get a level of understanding?
Our international department is using Hobsons EMS.
Okay.
And I'm here because I'm interested to find out if there is potential. I don't know enough about it for a domestic market.
Sure, okay. Well, let me take you through this, Duncan.
Okay.
Try and set the context of my experience of outsourcing, why we did it, what were the outcomes, and what were we actually trying to achieve from that. So a little bit about myself. I've been working in international higher education for the past 13 years. Held director's roles at Robert Gordon University, Glasgow Cali, and I've also got experience working in the private sector as well with Kaplan and also the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. So I'm very aware of the commercial pressures outside of education, but also how difficult it can be to implement change, to influence people, and to actually drive change within complex universities and institutions in the UK. So the chaos of recruiting, it is chaotic, and this is one of the most chaotic cities that we recruit from in the world, where I've spent a lot of time over the years. This is Lagos in Nigeria. International recruitment has changed hugely in the past 5 to 6 years. The choices now in terms of the people, who do you employ? Do you staff up an international office? Do you set up regional offices? How do you promote yourselves now? As we heard this morning, it's absolutely not just about the prospectus. I think that for the international market is dead in the water. How are you promoting? Lots of talk about social media, generating inquiries. Duncan talks about some of the older models around attending exhibitions, trying to create interest. Agents, will they still be here in 10 years' time? Some of them that can adapt might be, but universities are spending huge amounts of time and expense recruiting from agents. So it is a chaotic world out there, and trying to make your decisions on what's going to work for you as an institution, you need to be absolutely focused and clear. And I think the last panel made that very clear. Are you trying to throw your whole university out to the world market, or do you actually understand what your niche is? And if you don't understand what your niche is, then there's no point being out there, especially if you're one of the middle-ranking universities, where there were a number in the room this morning. Outsourcing is absolutely about influencing people. It's about engaging right across the university. Now, you may speak to international offices who think that outsourcing is a great idea and they want to sign a contract tomorrow, but do they have the influence to do that? Can they get their Pro-Vice-Chancellor, their Director of Admissions, their Finance Director to actually buy into that and understand what it means for the bottom line for the university, for diversity, for quality, for attainment and achievement? The only way that any outsourcing project for recruiting students is going to work is to get this flow working throughout the university, and the relationship with your outsourced partner, whether that's Hobsons or whether that's somebody else, has to be absolutely embedded. The international office, depending on your setup, lots of universities are either centralised, decentralised, college-driven. There's a whole number of varieties out there, but you have to influence these academics. There will be scepticism. Why are you taking control away from course leaders who in the past thought they were very good at recruiting students? Challenge them. Can they prove it? What's the results? What's the data? And that, for me, when I was working at Robert Gordon's, was one of the big influences in terms of why we outsourced. The power of the data, the power of the systems to actually fight your business plans and make your argument in a succinct, sustainable way. But it's the communication right across. And Duncan, if you just drop onto the next slide, the web, absolutely crucial. Now, I've not picked on anyone here in the UK, but this is the University of Helsinki. I don't know very much about them. I've not interacted with them. I don't work with them. But on first sight, that is very typical of university front pages. There's probably the option of, 150 clicks, 200 clicks? How are they connected in there? So if I'm an international student and I want to apply to whatever university it might be, I could get lost in that maze. You're not going to capture my details. You're not going to know anything about me. The chances are I'll drift out of it. If you go back up to the last one. So it's about ensuring, if you're outsourcing for inquiries, that your web is closed down, that it frees up academic time as well. You can sell that to them, that if it's handled centrally, if the templates are developed, you can filter it, you can monitor it, you can control the data and the incomes that are coming through your websites. Apart from, I'll go on to the model, the case study of why we did it at Robert Gordon's, but it was a reporting function for outsourcing. We didn't have the skill set, the capability, or the finance to upskill in our university, to give us the rich data to make decisions on marketing, to make decisions on product development, to make decisions on where the international market might be in 3 to 5 years' time. But above all else, before you even start, if you're interested in outsourcing, if you do not have your finance director on board and understanding the fundamentals of the business plan, then it can be dead in the water. If you can show them the sustainability, the return on investment, and actually potentially reducing costs, then you're going to get an ear that will listen to you. And compliance, compliance is absolutely huge now. From when I started recruiting in the UK 5-6 years ago, there were very few regulations or legislation. UK borders kind of gave higher education a light touch. That's utterly changed now. And universities have to be able to understand their data. They have to know exactly how many international students they've issued offer letters for, how many have enrolled, how many are still in their courses, how many have graduated, and if they don't, they're going to be in big problems in terms of actually securing their license going forward to recruit international students. So why did we outsource at Robert Gordon's? We outsourced for diversification. Robert Gordon's was a very oil and gas focused university right up in the northeast of Scotland. So quite a difficult location to recruit to, but it had a number of specialisms. The problem with that was we were basically recruiting from Nigeria, an oil and gas country, and India to a lesser extent. Huge postgraduate courses with 80, 100 students and not spread across the university. So our focus for outsourcing was to target our direct students who were already applying to the university, who were not being serviced by our agents in countries that we did not operate in. It gave us the opportunity to capture that market, professionalise the service, without necessarily employing a large number of international officers at high expense to go out to the market, still with no tracking systems. We thought about building up internal call centres. We thought about spending money on IT systems, but my experience, having worked in all of these institutions and across, is that universities are so dysfunctional in their own systems they operate that getting the systems to deliver what you want, maybe they could be done. My experience is they wouldn't be very good at service delivery, but it's the timescales. A year, 2 years, 3 years to do it. And it was about developing an integrated solution, not just being driven by the centre, by the international office, but absolutely embedded international marketing plans from the centre right across the schools. And that was challenging because you had to win round the deans, you had to win round the heads of school, and you had to show them what the benefit would be of doing that. So how did we go about doing it? Well, first of all, it was absolutely, once we'd identified that we had to diversify our international student population, we had to come up with a very, very robust business plan. And that wasn't written just by us, that was written in partnership with our outsourced partner, but more importantly, with the Director of Finance, and on top of that, a sponsoring PVC. They were the ones who were going to champion it, they were the ones who were going to fall if it failed, and have difficult times at senior management, so we had to educate them, we had to show them why we're thinking of doing it, what the benefit would be, not just to the finance director getting the return on investment, but actually the overall student experience, proving that we were professionalising the service to students and testing that in the future. How would we test it to make sure that it was delivering that? But above all else, once we got that on side, once we got it signed off and we agreed we were going to move forward, it was about pulling together a really strong project team within the institution. And not just with the institution, but also with our partners as well, working with Duncan, for example, and working with the team at Hobsons, who were the partner that we chose. And not just signing off the contract and saying, right, it's now up to you to deliver, because if you do that, it will fail. It has to carry on being an embedded partnership. And that's not to say it'll be it'll be a smooth journey and everything will be perfect and you'll instantly get your results in a year. But if you work together, we'll go on to show you some of the results that potentially can happen. Lastly though, the only way it worked for me heading up the international office was for me delivering the strategic side of things in the university, having those strategic discussions with Hobsons, for example, but making sure at operational level there were people developing and championing the Hobsons inquiry system, the templates, the marketing plans. So sharing our marketing plans with Hobsons so they were very clear where the peaks and troughs would be throughout the year. So what were the results? This is quite interesting for me because it shows you when we started off in 2006-07, this was the level of inquiries. So communications coming inbound. This is emails coming in, this is phone calls coming in, this is the web inquiry forms coming in. And the first year was a bit of trial and error. We set protocols, we tried to achieve what we thought would be heat status levels, so warm, cold, hot. And it was really feeling our way through that relationship. But if you move on to 2009-10, you can see the level of inquiries are actually dropping in terms of the inbound communication. And at first sight you might think, that's not good, that really does that could create difficulties. But our numbers went up, our conversions went up, and our fee income went up. Why? Because we had far more rich data at our fingertips to understand what the student decision-making process actually was. And we didn't need as many inquiries coming into the university. We knew how to manage and actually convert them. You also see as well that the outbound communication was critically important. That's targeting the student. That's keeping them up to date. Now, in the past, before we had an outsourced service, how did we do that? We had a few people answering phones. People knew emails were coming in. They tried to respond to them. There were generic emails. It was a really poor, and I hate to use the word, but it has been used this morning, and it is. It was poor customer service, no doubt about it. These are the results, though, and this, if anything else, I think just demonstrates, after we'd outsourced and working the relationship and making sure that we had buy-in, both with our outsourced partner and across the institution, what did we manage to achieve? Well, we managed to push our conversion rates up from about 1.6 up to around about the 2.3, 2.4%. That sounds like nothing. So what? But remember the last slide when we talked about the thousands of communication, that is actually a very significant conversion rate. And all the evidence shows that the longer you work that relationship, the higher the conversion rate moves over the years. Coming back to the central core, what were we trying to achieve? Diversification. Now, in the past, we were over-reliant pretty much on India and Nigeria. Now, they kind of held their own and carried on doing what they were doing, which was great, but the direct students increased significantly, which was absolutely our target. So in the past, we couldn't engage with them, we didn't engage with them, but working with our outsourced partner, we had a professional service delivery. So from that point of view, we actually achieved that goal. But what you will see as well is that our agent, numbers of students enrolling through agents, who can be an expensive way of recruiting, and there's no guarantee over the quality of service that agents are providing. They can be high maintenance, there's a lot of training involved, and how do you actually manage, evaluate, and monitor your agent? So that began to drop off, which meant that the overall spend on agents had fallen away as well. That's all very well, and I think Hobsons absolutely are a data-rich company, but you need to be very careful in institutions as well that you do not just throw that data at senior management. Some of them have got no idea what it means. You can baffle them, you can confuse them, to the point that they almost step back from it because they don't understand it. So it's about working with your partner to agree a dashboard that the VC wants to see and his senior management team will understand. And they understand nothing better than what it means to their bottom line. So, what did we achieve? Apart from the main goal of diversification, which we did achieve, the other, which made the finance director smile, was that our agency commission went down by 25%. Now, to put that into context, you're talking about £250,000, £300,000, which is fairly significant. Net fee income rose by 18%, and the university achieved its targets of moving international fee income up from 6.7 to 8.2 million. If we had tried to do it in-house by upstaffing in the international office, still with no inquiry or monitoring system, there's absolutely no guarantee that we'd get to that, and we may not even sustain where we've been. So, partnering with your outsourced partner. Things have moved on hugely. When we started working with Hobsons back in 2006, it was, and this is no criticism of them, this is more a criticism of institutions and how they operated. Teams, academics, international marketing staff got on planes, went overseas, handed, and this is not picking University of Plymouth, it's just an image of a prospectus. That was how you worked. You handed out prospectuses. Communications in a lot of the countries we worked in were dreadful. So whether it was sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, broken phone lines, bad email communication, servers down, lots of scribbled contact lists of who you met when you were overseas, applications that were then printed off and sent through the post, and it was a fairly shambolic, chaotic process. International students still arrived though, so they fought to get through those barriers. And where we are today, I mean, I've never seen it, such a challenging environment in international recruitment now. We've got the situation in the UK where government policy is very much putting a huge obstacle in place for international students coming in. As Duncan said, it's like It can be UK PLC closed down, so there's a massive communication job out there with their overseas partners, with potential overseas students to influence about why would you now choose UK PLC. We're no longer just competing with the USA, with Australia, we're competing with Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Ireland, Cyprus, Germany. All of them have got their offerings in place as well. There's so many ways of converting now. It's not just about an email conversion. We had a lot of experience using the EMS, the online chat, involving academics who were course leaders, giving very specific information. We maybe ran sessions on visa and immigration through online chat. So it wasn't just about leaving everything for the outsourced partner. We absolutely engaged and embedded with that. So we were having that continuity. And that's how the students operate. They're on their online chat, they're on their mobile phone, they're on their iPad. They're doing about 4 or 5 things at one time. I can't do that. I can't do any more than one thing. But that is how they operate. That is how they make their decisions. And that's how they communicate with each other as well. So the nature of the relationship with Hobsons, with the outsourced partner, has completely changed and will continue to change. Adapt or die. This is the old model of recruitment. Spending large amounts of money, staying in lovely 5-star fancy hotels, racking up huge expense bills, reclaiming your Saturdays and Sundays that you've worked past 5 o'clock, an extra half hour here and there, visiting dodgy, crummy agents' offices that didn't have any air conditioning, getting your upgrades to your Emirates business class, attending an expensive exhibition, spending thousands of pounds, maybe not even bothering to data capture. Not everyone works like that. The international recruitment industry is very professional. There's a lot of good people out there who are very focused and know what they do. But there's still a huge amount of wastage in terms of money and what the actual focus is. If you ask the average university around the UK, apart from the ones who are specialised in what they do, why are you in India? What are you trying to recruit? What are you doing in Nigeria? Who are you actually trying to recruit? Well, we've got a course of business management, and they don't know. And that message now, students just are not interested in hearing that. So as far as I'm concerned, that model's dead. And you can be cost effective. The technology is there that you can enhance your reputation, you can tell your story. You will need a bit of the business development. That will always exist. Because when you're talking about partnerships, which are important, that is required. But now, as head of international office, I would absolutely question at the start of the year, but we did this last year, so what? How are you going to recruit this year? It's not just about you go to India 3 times a year. So I think that really needs to be addressed. A bit controversial, but that's the way I see it. And this is, internationalisation, it's been buzzing around there now for, 5, 10 years, and every VC will have a take on it, a slant on it, or will slip it into a global presentation. And for me, this is like a kind of strategy map that the university maps out at the start of the year. If they're not globally developed, it's all about internationalisation. It means that we want diversity, we want return on investment, we want a global reach as a university, we want outcomes, we want our students to get good jobs. We want mobility, and when I talk about mobility, I mean UK students going out to China, going out to India, not just international students coming in. That's fine, looks great, fits in really nicely with the university strategy, but it's the delivery underneath that. Are you geared up as an institution? Do you have the people? Do you have the skill set? Do you have the systems to deliver that? I would imagine you can probably deliver a little bit of it. You've probably got some really talented staff in your institutions. But unless you invest huge amounts of human resource and finance, there's no way you'll get up to that. That's when you need to consider about outsourcing. But you need to be very clear about what you're trying to outsource and what the outcome of that outsourcing is. So it's not just about pushing away the inquiries and the applications because it's a hassle, the office is filling up, and it makes your life easier. It's what is the actual strategic outcome of your outsourcing venture. And for me, that's something that needs to be the key when you're making that outsourcing decision. And that's it from us. I think we've got maybe, 10, 15 minutes for questions and answers, if anyone's got any.
Hi.
Hello, can I ask a sort of Chinese walls question, which is that, I mean, you obviously work with a number of institutions and have data from a number of institutions, but equally you present figures which are sort of top-level figures. To what extent do you expect to be able to use the data you get from individual institutions as part of, you know, selling Hobsons, selling your service to other people?
It's a really good question. The data is completely at universities, hence why everything I presented was amalgamated, averaged out. So we don't actually use individual institutions, kind of increasing conversion rates, increasing diversification, those kind of things. We're looking into ways of how we can do that because we've got so much data now, as you saw from those only 3 or 4 slides. We present to our universities for 2 hours in January every year on the data from September, which is, you know, all data broken down by course, nationality, those kind of things. So in terms of what we can give to the market or, you know, as part of the sales pitch, specifically not a lot. I mean, if you had, for example, if you had relationships with certain people that use us and you spoke to them and they were happy to kind of talk you through it, absolutely, we could look at something like that. But just a general to market, it's always going to be kind of high level amalgamated stuff.
And just to pick up on that, I mean, one of the, I suppose I kind of left it out, but one of the reasons that we saw real benefit in it is that, I suppose back then you could have been part of the British Council, and I think every university in the UK probably was, but being part of whether it was Hobsons or another company, it gave a benchmarking opportunity. So it was like a kind of closed network where there were universities with a like mind of doing what you're doing. So that type of data, no, you wouldn't generally share it out in the press or whatever, but within the closed confines of that group, you were more than happy to kind of share your data and your examples to show what was working, what was not, and that was a kind of closed network that worked quite well.
It's something we also try and do with our Australian, because we've got the Australian universities as well. We work with 50% of the universities over there. So we try and get data sharing going on between our partners there as well. You know, because obviously I realise that we're all competitors in the market, but actually there are good people to kind of sound ideas, obviously what they're doing in different markets.
Yeah, so I was thinking back to what Paul was saying about benchmarking, you know, Sussex and benchmarking.
Yeah.
And okay, they were using, you know, sort of standard published teaser data, but it's, say, if pool people wanted to do that, they could do that.
100%, yeah. And like Stuart said, I mean, we do, so this CNT, we do a similar kind of thing for our EMS university partners, and a big part of that last year was focused on applications to enrolments, because we understood from speaking to our universities, actually getting applications in wasn't the hard bit, it was getting applications to enrolments, so we just focused on that for the whole day. So yeah, that's part of it as well.
Does their service have any potential for a UK or domestic recruitment? And like what is the business model behind it?
Yeah, good question again. Yes, it's something that in Australia we actually do international and domestic, and it's something that has really, we've thought about for 2 or 3 years, but this year it's really come to the fore because we've had 3, 4, 5 universities come and ask us about what we could potentially do for them domestically. So I guess that's part of the reason for this presentation today. 100% yes, we've started a steering group to actually, because it's so different, you know, whilst there are a lot of synergies and there are a number of similarities with UCAS and the roles that, you know, when you can actually talk to students, obviously this is all based around communication and an integrated communication strategy. When you have the kind of deadline dates around January, March, and understanding when we can speak to the domestic students, because as I understand it from our initial discussions, that's very great. Some people will say you cannot speak to them once they've put in their top 2 choices. Others will say, well, it's a gentleman's agreement. You know, actually you can, you just need to do it under the radar. So we need to understand what the legislation is around it. I would hope that we'd have something domestic within the next few months. I mean, in the build-up to kind of September, starting the September campaign. So if you're interested, I can certainly talk to you afterwards about what we're thinking. It's very much intelligence gathering at this stage.
But what about graduate applications domestically? Graduate students?
Yeah.
I mean, you haven't got the UCAS rules on that,
Absolutely,
and you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
have the deadlines that would give you the staffing, you know,
Yeah.
you've got a better spread of applicants.
And I think as well, I mean, the types of the MS International, I mean, that was predominantly postgraduate for the majority of universities, so the models are kind of built to deliver against postgraduate.
Yeah, so
And
that would be
seem
a lot
to
more
me to be a
straightforward for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
more
Especially
realistic.
based on the conversations this morning about actually maybe we've missed a trick with postgraduate communication and what they actually need from a university in terms of it's different to what undergraduates need, certainly. Yeah, and that would be a lot easier for us to kind of get involved in quicker.
So do you foresee, like, for domestic thing that you'd be dealing with, like, more like an inquiry centre with parents and things as well, or would it be literally focused on those prospective students and taking them through?
I think it would be different, as we found with international, again I couldn't really focus too much on it, languages. So we have in the UK office 5-6 languages. I am coming to a point with this. We know that in India, for example, we deal with a lot of parents. So actually using languages to speak to those parents. We also know that in China we have to use those languages quite a lot to get through to the student. I think it'd be similar domestically. I think there will be a focus, a communication stream for parents, but that will just be a certain cohort. There will also be the communication stream for students. As we said this morning, I think it was Wes said, you can't just focus on one or the other, so I think we'd have different communication strategies for both. It's all about, the whole point of this service, I could have done it in 2 words at the beginning, is focus and priorities, and the idea is that if we were to do something domestically, it would just be understanding where we need to focus and where the differentiation needs to be in terms of segmentation. All right. Great, thank you very much. So I think next it's, if you're staying around, drinks down that way. Yep. Yeah, excellent. Cheers, guys.